Welcome to my podcast, Conversations with David. I am your host, David Owasi. And on this podcast, we're talking to accomplished entrepreneurs and professionals across the country. We are learning about what keeps them passionate, what keeps them going. And we're also talking about some of the lessons and insights learned along the way. Now, I'm here with my friend and someone I have huge respect for, Rana Bokhari. She's someone who was the previous leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party. Why don't you introduce yourself, Rana?
Yeah. Hi, David. Thanks for thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Same to
Yay.
you.
Yeah, my name is Rana. Most people might recognize me from politics. Currently, I'm a business owner. I'm a lawyer. I practice mainly solely in First Nations governance, Aboriginal, and some Indigenous law, but majority is Aboriginal law. So, majority of my time is on First Nations employment issues, as well as governance and issues surrounding that. Um, Other than that, I speak extensively on intersectional femininity, diversity and inclusion, and a lot of passion projects on the side, which are, again, a lot of fun. And we'll talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And where I want to start from, Rena, is your career in law. I'm just very curious about your background there. What was something that made you interested in going into law and pursuing law in the first place? What was that of interest to you?
You know what? It was not my first choice ever. I actually deeply wanted to be, mostly because of my parents, a doctor. And yeah, so law was something that just kind of, it presented itself as an option. And once I decided to do it, I was older in life. I think I was about 27 or 28 when I decided. So I was definitely an older student going into law. So yeah, and I went to U of M. I was actively involved in student politics. I did a lot of things, kind of basically what I do in real life is what I do in all my professional life, right? So for me, I don't have that distinguishment between who I am as a person versus what I do in my legal career or my legal path or my politics or anything else I do. So it just aligned with what I wanted to do. I know everyone will always, and it's just kind of what people say, right? Oh, I wanted to go into law to fix the world, and I wanted to do all of these things, and I want to be that change maker. And of course, a lot of us do want to do that, but for me, it was just a flexible degree that would allow different doors to open, and law is a degree like that. So
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that response. And there was something I wanted to pick on your answer there, Rena, and it was you and I have a little bit of a similar background. We are immigrant, first generation immigrants. Yeah,
yeah,
and we sometimes have that pressure from our family where, of course, education is very important, especially when you move from a different part of the world to North America. And sometimes there's that pressure to, you got to be an engineer, you have to be an accountant, you have to be a doctor. And of course, the parents and family are coming from a genuine place of care. They want the best for you. But what
yeah.
would your advice be for a student who say, your family just moved from some other part of the world to Canada and they're sort of feeling that pressure, but they're like, I want to be a musician. I want to be, something completely different from what the expectation of normal is. How do you handle that pressure? Seems like that's something you faced.
Yeah, and for me, it was different, right? Like, I grew up in a very different household, and I think all of my life and my career has reflected the fact that I grew up in a very different household. My parents and my dad especially was very supportive in anything I wanted to do, right? Their main goal is, and I think a lot of immigrants parents are thinking in their minds, okay, well, we've literally sacrificed everything. We don't have our family, we don't have our support systems, we don't have anything, and we brought this family here for them to have a better life. So in their minds, what they know to be a better life are engineers, doctors, lawyers. It's guaranteed income. It's all this stuff, right? Because that's what they're saying, right? They're saying that we never want you to be homeless, without shelter, without food, not provide for your family, and they also want that respect, right? So if I could dive into a parent, who's kind of pushing their child to do that, I think what you're really talking about is that respect aspect. So for me, I think it's more about respect. I think that they know they're coming to a world that does not look like them. And they know that their education could be one of the key things that allows you to compete in a world that does not look like you. So how does a child react to that? I think you got to be really, really open and understanding and learn how to communicate, basically, right? Because what they know to be the world is sometimes not the real world here, right? So I think communication, and I think you have to really stand by your passions, right? If you choose to be a musician, but also, also figure out, is that really going to be the thing that, like, what's your value system, right? Who do you want to be? What do you want to do? So,
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that insight. And I think it's a
mhm.
particularly interesting problem. And something I will add to that is having a game plan. So I think at the end of the day, parents are not necessarily just worried about whether you're going to make it or be successful or be homeless and whatnot. They just want to see that you have a clear plan. Okay, if you want to be a doctor, or if you want to be a musician or whatever it is, okay, what's the plan? How do you want to approach this? How do you want to make money off of this?
Yeah.
What's the next step over the next year or two? And I think if you have a clear plan, because I was sort of in a similar situation like that when I decided to run my first business while being in university. In the first initial days, my parents were not they were very like apprehensive and worried for me. I'm going to grow into debt, whatever. But I was able to show them a clear plan for how I plan to use those skills. Now, back to you, Reina. Your focus in law is on First Nations and employment and issues dealing with First Nation brothers and sisters. What would you say was what drew you to that particular angle or that particular set of issues, and why were you passionate about that?
You know what? I would love to be the person who says that that it was something that I sought out, but I think that to be completely blunt, I feel like it sought me out. Because when I started my law practice, when I started my law, when we started my firm, or when we started our business, it was doctors and dentists corporate. That's what that may very well still be on my website, but that's what it was. It was doctors, dentists, corporate, and it changed naturally. And I think, just for people listening, right? So is that you have to be able to be flexible. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable. So for me, I was adaptable. When certain issues continued to arise, I pivoted quickly, and that was my niche, and it remained my niche, and it became a very successful niche. And I love it passionately, and it's very much a part of my life. So I don't really even see it as work, really, other than the skill set that I use, right? So I mean, I think that's the long and the short of it. I can't really say that I sought it out, but for me, you know what I mean? Like, what does it mean to even be a lawyer, right? Like, you have to be able to have the vision and the knowledge and the ability to draw out issues, right? To seek out issues that maybe are not relevant or particularly in the limelight for somebody else, right? So with the skill set that you have, for me, I recognize that there was issues in it, right? So when I was taking on these issues, I was taking them on because I recognized as a lawyer that these are issues that are going to need attention. So then I just kind of focused on it.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that. And there was something I particularly picked up on your answer, which was, the ability to be flexible and pivot to a niche. Because now when we talk about, general entrepreneurship as a whole, which, you're an entrepreneur in a way, even though you're a lawyer, a lot of people, I think, perhaps, focus on trying to appeal to uh, too big of a demography or too big of a type of people, and sometimes you feel very apprehensive or you feel very nervous about drilling down and centralizing or finding a smaller core of people. But would you say that for you to be successful as a business owner, you have to find that little small demographic where you can make the most impact on, instead of just focusing on too big of a crowd trying to sell to everybody? What are your thoughts on that?
For me, yes, right. I think that there's a lot of weight behind the concept of you can't be everything to everyone, right? You just can't be everything to everyone. So focusing on what you're really good at is probably a really important pillar for success, right? I think that if you can be the expert in something and really be the expert in it, be the go-to person for a certain thing, of course, like that would definitely lead you to some form of success. And again, who defines success as what? That's up to you. I personally define it probably most different than most other people, but for whatever it's worth, whatever you feel is successful. So yes, I think niches are really great. I think the ability to be adaptable and flexible are critically important for any entrepreneur. I think to continue your education and knowledge constantly, make sure you are up and on top of what is coming out in your industry, whether it relates to you or not. Because you always want to know what you have to do, but also what the opposition is doing. That goes for politics, that goes for business, that goes for law.
Absolutely.
No matter what, you need to know what the other people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not to follow them,
Mm.
or to be like them, but to recognize where the gaps are and maybe you can fill them.
For sure. And just for our listeners listening, as you were describing and explaining your thoughts on niching down and narrowing down what you're good at. I was thinking about a problem has been on my mind over the last couple of months, which is, specialization versus generalization in career. And the reason why I was thinking about this is, when the pandemic hit, a lot of people who were most affected were people who were too specialized. So even on one hand, you have to specialize on your niche, but you don't want to over specialize and not be able to do anything else. I feel like in yourself as a lawyer, I feel like you can still take on all the problems. At least you started out with dealing with your everyday doctors and lawyers, doctors and engineers and all types of professionals. But what would you say is finding out how to find that balance where, of course, you want to find your crowd and people who you can speak to, because you can't speak to everybody, but at the same time, not limiting yourself in such a way where when the pandemic hits, you can make that easy pivot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think and it, and I'm going to speak just a bit more generally, right? Because I think that um, I always find it, you know, difficult to always just talk about law because I do so many other things, right? So um, I think if we take 4 steps back, what is the world that we're living in right now, even prior to the pandemic? We live in a world that the majority of our quote unquote generation, right, are this group of people, so i.e. not our parents, we all have the ability, most of us, even if we haven't done it, we're thinking about it in some capacity. It's gig economy, right? Like you got a few side things going all the time. And so for me, I never really thought of it that way at all. I didn't think, okay, well, if I specialize in law, blah, 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 this will happen, that will happen. For me, I know that there's other, my income is diversified enough that if I lost it here, I would be able to make it up here. So I guess my answer to your question is, yeah, you can be generalized. Maybe you don't need to be generalized in one industry, right? Maybe the key is in the world that we live in the world that we're trying to survive in right now, is figure out what your skill set is, right? What can you leverage? What knowledge base, what skills, what attitudes, what aptitudes, what do you have that you can leverage and kind of use it for different industries? Maybe not everything has to be law. Maybe I generalized in some consulting and then that pivoted into something different. So for me, I mean, I'm super broad about that, right? I just don't, I'm not a one, I just don't believe in one job. I don't think that we're built for, in this type of world, you're only surviving off of one 9 to 5 job. We're not our parents' generation, right? We're just a completely different universe. So going back to my adaptation and flexibility, if you're unable to do that, you're going to get hit. You know, you're going to get hit, right? Those of us who had diversified incomes, we may have lost it one way, but we were able to kind of pick up or survive in a different way, right? So, I mean, that would be my long and short answer to that.
Thank you for your insight. I think that's no, that really hit the nail on the head. Yeah, we have to diversify income. We have to have some specific niches, if possible, more than one, because that will help you to be more flexible if something happens to one side. I think I read somewhere that over our lifetimes, we generally have anywhere between 4 to 5 separate distinct careers over a lifetime, and especially for people who are maybe in university and are just worried, what do I want to do for my life? It's don't worry about it too much, because what you're probably doing right now is most likely not what you will end up with.
Probably not going to be what you end up. Yeah.
There's going to be opportunities. And the last piece of question I want to ask based off of your career in law is you, of course, have your own firm. And what was that journey like, from going to a law student, you started, well, I guess you would say later on than you're a regular person. And now you're a partner at a law firm and you have your own practice. For someone who is aspiring to have their own practice, or, maybe they want to have their own practice, whether they're a dentist, whether they're a doctor, or it could be in different areas. What was that process like, having your own practice as a professional?
Yeah, for me it was really different, right? So even the setup of our business right now is quite different, right? So basically, um, I graduated. I got called to the bar in, I think it was May. By July, I was running for leader. By October, I was leader of the party. You know what I mean? So I had a completely different universe. And so when I left politics, I think I left in maybe May or June or something. And then literally 2 weeks later, I opened the practice. So one thing I would say for anyone, and generally, I think this again goes for all business, right? Whether you're a professional, whether you're in school right now, seek out knowledge, right? And you do not need to know everything, right? There are people who can help you do things, and um, using that expertise, right? So for most of us, you have bookkeepers, you have all these different groups of people. Now, that's a general statement. For me personally, I streamlined everything. Okay, so for my first and 2 years, business is hard. So anyone who's listening, if you even had a big business or a small business, or if you tried it, you know for a fact it is very difficult, right? The first 2 years are incredibly hard, no matter what, because you're just trying to get yourself moving. So in those times, for me, it was, and maybe people will agree with that or not. For me, I streamlined everything, right? I did everything myself. I did not bring in any second or third party until I was 2 years in and I knew that I couldn't manage it. Right. So again, it comes to the fact of knowing who you are, knowing what your capabilities are, and be honest with yourself. If you are unable to do something, don't play the game. Don't take the risks. Bring on somebody who can help you fulfill whatever need it is. For law, it's a lot of like the bookkeeping stuff. The practice itself is in our head, right? Or we know how to seek out the answers that we need, but it's the regulatory stuff that is the stuff that we need eyes on, who are for people to make sure that we're doing it correctly, right? Because again, we serve the public. We're very, very careful with how we deal with the public, and we have a regulatory body that makes sure that we are doing well.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for the answer. And from what I'm hearing from you, for our listeners, you have to be willing to grind for at least 2 years to just kind of put in the hard work. I definitely understand where you're coming from in my first business as well. My first year was particularly a hard, difficult grind and journey, and then it got better and better. And then number two is know when you need to ask for help and have someone come in to help you out. But again, be willing to do most things by yourself, save money, and also to just gain that skill at a start, and then know when to delegate at some point, right?
Yeah. And also just remember, like when you're doing things yourself, and again, this would not apply to every single industry, right? But for us, when you're doing things yourself, you learn, right? And those nuances will help you in the future, right? They will help you again build. And you do need to know the stuff, whether or not you've outsourced it or not, because you still have to do the oversight, right? So
Sure.
you at least didn't have to know have a minimum understanding of those things.
For
So
sure. Yeah, and let's make a bit of a pivot here to your career in politics. I know you kind of touched about it a little bit, but being the leader of a provincial party is no small feat. How did that come about, and what was that like? What was that experience like?
yeah, no, was and it will always be an incredible part of my life. It was a learning experience for me. How did I get there? I don't really know what the answer to that is. I don't know. I'm an action person. I'm an opportunity person. I don't really shy away from much. Most things I'll look at and I'll be like, I can do it, and then I'll go do it. That's not to say, however, because again, it's an incredibly important position, right? And there's a lot of vulnerability personally, and there's a lot of people who are vulnerable coming to you for stuff. So that's not to say that I didn't take the role once I was in it incredibly seriously. It was, but how I got there was kind of, I had always been involved in politics. I just took the leap
Mm.
at a very young age. Um, I think the second part of your question was, how was it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, no different than any other woman of color in a leadership role, basically, is the easy answer to that. I know that in hindsight, I probably accepted more than I should have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I probably, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I probably minimized myself
Mm.
in a lot of ways to make other people feel good. And I think that, you probably have a lot of, young women who are either in, moving up the ladder in their jobs or up the businesses or in their careers or in boards or whatever else. That's a really kind of, if I could give any piece of advice is, you gotta be big. You know what I mean? And I don't mean physically big, but I mean that you need to be big. You need to take up that space because there are a lot of people who will always try to kind of squish you down, um, and minimize what you're saying or minimize the value of what you're saying. And that's where the problem lies,
Mm.
right? It was a great experience. I have no regrets. I'll probably do it again one day. But it's just a part of life. You do it. Definitely very unique.
Hmm.
Learned a lot.
Absolutely. And, I do remember a number of times, driving. I can't remember where I was driving to or from, but I remember hearing your voice a couple of times. I'm like, that's a very unique voice in politics. And I'm a politics junkie myself. So I was like, who's this lady? I got to go research. And I found a lot about you, and I was very inspired by your story. But for someone who is thinking of, especially, let's say, women of color, a minority who is thinking of taking a position in politics, and it's funny thing, I had recently on this show Uzuma Asogara. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. Yeah, but it's very encouraging to see people like you and I taking some of these leadership roles in politics. If there's someone like you and I who, an immigrant or a minority trying to take on something as monumental as this, what would your advice be to them if you were to advise yourself, from a couple of years ago? What would you tell
Mhm.
yourself?
It's a great question.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that if there's a difference between, and I just want to kind of acknowledge this, I think that um, there's always a difference, and I'm saying this for a specific reason. There's always a difference between um, individuals or women of color in not bottom roles, but not leadership roles, right? So you'll see women as, as doctors, but perhaps not the decision makers or chairs or blah, blah, blah. You'll see a lot of women of color in nursing, but they're not the nurse in charge kind of deal, right? So there's this concept, and I talk about it often when I'm talking about diversity, and also when I'm talking about intersectional issues, right? It's this concept that um, basically, yes, there may be starting to have, like, we may start to have women of color in certain areas,
Mm.
but what you don't have is them at the top.
Mm.
And so for me, I went from zero to the top, right, to the decision making issue. And so for people like Uzma and Nahani and Bernadette and like all these amazing women who are just killing it, right? Um, those are the women you want to see in those leadership positions, right? Those are the women you want to see in those decision making positions. So
Mm.
they're incredibly all inspiring. Advice I would give myself is, uh, I don't even know what I'd give myself, to be honest with you. I don't know. I think that I was as genuine as I could have been at the time. And I don't think anything's really changed about me from that moment to now.
Mm.
I'm still exactly the same person. Other than the fact that I'm probably a bit more cautious of who's around me.
Mm. Mm.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think I'm more able to recognize when something is a gender issue, a race issue, or just a skill set issue,
Right.
right? So at that time in my world, I believe that perhaps I didn't have the skill set. Leaving it now, I know it was not the skill set. It was more about other issues,
Our
right?
issues.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So, but again, learning, you got to figure it out and roam through it.
Sure, and one thing I've learned just in the time I've come to know you is action. At the end of the day, if you want to achieve any or accomplish anything great or monumental, you have to just seize the initiative and just do it, and just force the issue, if you will, just like your story. And that's something I've learned time and time again. You don't have to be perfect. A lot of people wait to have all the perfect degree, everything lined up properly, but just doing it is always that first step, right?
Right. And also, if I could just jump in, um, being this concept of being perfect will be your biggest hindrance.
Mm.
It will be the thing that you have in your mind that will hold you back from doing what you need to do. You do not need to be perfect. What you need is the desire and the passion and the ability to seek out that knowledge.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that insight. It's very, very cool to talk to someone who's been in that phase and hearing from your experience. Now, you've touched on a lot of issues on diversity, inclusion, and intersectional issues. What would you say, like for someone who is kind of just new to hearing about intersectional issues, what does that really mean, and how do you define that?
Okay. So basically, and I would also, I guess the one easy thing I could really say is I would encourage people. I have a TED talk that I did right after I left politics, on and I didn't call it intersectionalism, right? But it's basically about that. It's these different various, we'll call them walls that come up, right? So, whether it's a gender issue, whether it's your sexuality, whether it's the color of your skin, whether it's your religion, whatever, all these things. For me, why I became passionate about intersectionality is that every time I would have an issue, okay, there was a racial issue about, okay, she's a terrorist, she's a pack, she's all these things, and I'm being very blunt, right? So you'll never find me tiptoeing around these things. If I overcame that stuff, then it'd be like, well, okay, but she's also a Muslim, so she must be, like there's all of these things, right? And this concept is basically it. Not everything's cookie cutter, and not everything to do with gender equality is about white women. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
They're allies, but I think that there needs to be a very clear distinction between um, within battles for equality, there are other issues. And those other issues are what I refer to when I'm talking about that intersectionality, right? Yes, we will all have the gender issue, but within that gender issue, some may have issues of, religious issues. Some may have, you know, able issues, right? Some There's a whole host of things that will come up, and that's what we're talking about, is to just really shine a light on the fact that not everything is, again, cookie cutter. It's not just two pieces of a puzzle and one group all falls in it. Well, there's many more. But so for you're a woman, like, if you have to be able to, or others who are your allies should be able to recognize the fact that there's other issues within our circle, quote unquote.
Right. So it's really
Does that make
understanding,
sense?
yeah,
That's
the
what
nuances, right?
Yeah. It's not the I mean, it's probably not the best example, but I'm just trying to kind of make it as simple as possible. It's just the fact that it's not all cookie cutter.
For
You know,
sure.
there's a lot of other issues that people of visible minority, people who are Muslim, there's Islamophobia, people who are indigenous women have. There's all these different things within gender battles, within
Mm.
gender equality, within that concept that we are dealing with.
Mm.
You know, so why does that matter? Sorry, I have to finish this because it's really important. Why does that matter? Because if the people who are making decisions on top are not recognizing our challenges, then you really haven't done justice to everybody. You've
Mm.
really only done it to your little group of people. So that's kind of where it comes into play.
For sure, and for a lot of people who don't think, who think, oh, race, people who are, talking about issues of race or any sort of challenge like that, they're just trying to, cause noise or whatever it is they associate with that. It's very important based on the reason you gave. If people who are making decisions that affect the lives of people who are dealing with those issues, if they're not aware of those issues, then they're, whether by design or not, they're doing disservice to those set of people,
Oh yeah.
and that is very unfair to them, and that is why it's very important to raise the awareness for over issues like that.
Right. And raising awareness, and I guess, and I apologize. I'm super blunt about stuff like this. I have no, and I say this with all due respect. Um, we live in a country where the population is very diverse, and it continues to be diverse, and there will be times where you will find that there's just a lot of differences in what makes up our country,
Sure.
right? And when you are not, so let's just take it from an economical perspective, or a governance perspective, or a international issues perspective. Um, you cannot leave groups of people out of decision making when they're the ones that your decisions affect.
Sure.
Like, you cannot talk about poverty, sitting in, like, your ivory tower, basically, twiddling your thumbs, never having seen it, known about it, asked about it, and think that your decision is really the best decision possible. Most likely your decision is a decent decision, but it's probably going to cost you a lot more money.
Mm.
It's probably not based on evidence. And I would assure you that if you went right to the grassroots level, you would probably get the most efficient, effective, cost effective, humanitarian perspective that was actually correct for everybody.
For sure. And for someone who is in a position like this, where this is, they're making a decision that affect people out of their own group. So people who are, challenged with that poverty or sexual orientation or whatever. My thought, I would say the first step for them is to listen first, is to say, okay, let's listen to what you have to say and genuinely listen. Would you say that's the first step, or would you be that first step for those in those situations?
Yeah, and listening requires listening. So I don't mean listening for the purpose of, oh, I've now consulted and now I'm going to go make any decision I want. But I did have that coffee with that group of people, so it's all good. That's not that's not listening. Um, you know, but and I don't even know if it's listening. I perhaps maybe don't agree if it's simply listening. I maybe think it's more groups of people who have, you know what? Simple answer: boards, decision making groups, chairs, leaders need to be more diverse.
For sure. I mean, that will be the obvious perfect answer, but we both know that that will take some time before we get there. But, when people like yourself are advocating for issues and you are in leadership positions, and we're having more and more people like the Uzumers of the world in at those tables, then of course that makes life a little better. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you had a point to make on that before I moved on.
Oh no, but I was gonna say, yeah, you're correct in that it will take time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we live in a world where you have a generation coming up that truly are allies,
Sure.
right? So I think that a lot of the battles we are facing perhaps came from a lot of different generations. I'm a hopeful individual. I think that a lot of people who are in our realm, we are employed with, or we're friends with, or we
Mm.
engage with, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for discussions to be had there. So people are supporting each other.
For sure. And no, on that note, we're shooting this episode 1st of January 2021. 2020 was quite a turbulent year, but one of the highlights of the year was the massive conversation around all of these issues we've been talking about. Based on considering the fact that you are sort of in that arena, you're living in that space, both through your work and through your passion. Would you say that moved that the whole 2020 movement on race inclusion? Do you think that moved the dial a little bit in terms of having that conversation, getting people to be more and more aware of the issues? How impactful was some of 2020 to what you're passionate about?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that there did it move the dial? I, it did. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely did. I think it'd be silly to say no, it did not. I think that the issue becomes right after something like, and we saw this during Idle No More, Black Lives Matter, or anything that's against Islamophobia right now, or whatever's happening in that racial fear and those in the sphere. It's the continuous pushing it, right? So yes, absolutely erased it, but we can't just let up,
Sure.
right? So you have to keep going, and you have to keep advocating, and you have to keep having those really difficult discussions.
Mm.
Yes, it's uncomfortable. Okay, nobody said that this wasn't uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to have race issues. I'm sure some of your audience right now is probably rolling their eyes. Oh, here we go again. And that's fine. And we understand that. Everybody understands that. But there's nothing wrong with working together
Mm.
and creating better worlds for all of us. Because at the end of the day, you know, when one group does better, everybody does better.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
just that's just even if that's the only thing you will agree with. Even if you're a person who just doesn't believe that racial issues exist, even if that's the only thing you believe in is that one group does better, we will all do better.
Sure.
That should be motivation enough for you to be like, all right, what do we have to do here?
Mm-hmm. Especially in a country as very diverse as Canada is, it definitely makes a bit a difference for sure.
Mhm.
Now, I want to change, move a conversation a little bit into what I call soft skills, emotional intelligence. Now, based off of our conversation, you've demonstrated some of those skills, and from your life in politics, and I'm sure in your work with people who are facing, pain in some sort of way, whether it's through racism, through um, uh, exclusion at some level, whether as a result of them being women or whatever it is. I feel like you've had to use some of these skills to understand, empathize, and to then help them out. What would you say is the role of these softer skills in career success? Whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a business owner, what are your thoughts on this, on the importance of these skills?
What's really interesting is pre-pandemic,
Hmm.
it was important. It was important. I think that as leaders will always recognize it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Leadership, or whether you are a leader or whether you're in a leadership role, you will always recognize the fact that those are critical skills. Understanding how to speak to people, the empathy, the ability to really engage in a conversation so the other person can put their trust in you. Whether you're a politician, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a leader, it's a crux of your job, really, because without that, you can't really gain somebody's trust. Um, but I think post pandemic is really the question. I think so much will change and so much has changed that I think post pandemic, those soft skills, the fact that we're even calling them soft skills, no, I would literally unequivocally say these are types of skills now after a pandemic, probably leading up to the pandemic, they need to be um, in schools. Like we need to be teaching our kids that it is okay to fail. And when you fail, this will be your reaction to it, right? I think that what we've done in our educational systems, and I don't remember or know the history of why we got to this point, is that no one's allowed to fail anymore, right? You're not allowed to tell a student that they failed or they had this issue or they had that issue. Whereas when we were kids, which is probably why we do have emotional or we do have that soft skill when we were kids, we did fail. We were told we did have to learn those skill set, and I don't know if the generation coming up is learning those skills. You need to learn empathy. You need to figure out how you're going to deal with challenges. How what is resilience? You know, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's how to be resilient. You know, if you have not taught an entire generation of people the value of learning resilience, you know, we're going to have problems, right? So I for me even the concept of soft skills, I just don't even like the terminology surrounding it. These are essential skills. These should be in every school, in every family. They should be a core of who you are as a human being. Learn those skills because they are going to help you in the future.
Yeah,
just
for sure.
just very basic stuff, you
There
know.
indeed. Yeah, it's funny because you're not the first person who said, David, I don't like you characterizing these skills as soft skills because they are really hard skills. They're very, very crucial for success. But I still keep reverting to my old habits of calling them soft skills. So maybe I'll change that moving forward. But when I
Let's
think
redefine
about,
it.
what was that?
I'm like, let's redefine it.
Let's redefine it. Yeah, I, there was a word someone used, now I forget. But when it comes to these skills, one of the things that I think is really crucial and is at the root of everything is the concept of self-awareness, because self-awareness really is where everything starts. If you have an understanding of who you are and you're able to have that internal dialogue of understanding yourself, you really then reverberates to everything else. You're able to practice resilience. You're able to know when you need help. You're able to be vulnerable. You're able to practice empathy. But based on that concept of self-awareness, is that something you've come across before? Is that something you think is crucial? And how have you grown that skill in awareness over the years?
So I'm going to try to say this as as appropriately as possible. There's a lot of and I can only speak to us as a group of people. When maybe perhaps a lot of Eastern countries, right? I can only speak to what I know. I know that in a lot of Eastern countries and a lot of immigrants that come from Eastern countries, um, because we are so taught, whether it's like a religiously or culturally or whatever it is, because we're so taught about our ancestors. Okay, because we're so taught about our ancestors and where we came from and who we are and all that stuff, it is very difficult actually to not be self-aware, right? Because you know where you came from, you know what you're carrying, you know what your responsibilities are in life. I'm not talking about in careers. As a human being, what are your principles? What are your value systems? What, who are you as a human being? So for me, I think that there's a big gap between people knowing who they are. How could you have self-awareness if you don't even recognize what your own values are? If you don't even know who you are? And that could be anything. You can define who you are in any which way you want, but for me, I really think that it's about self-reflection, figuring out who you are, and what's like, what are your non-negotiables? I used to talk about this in politics all the time. Like, what are your non-negotiables? What are your things that you will not negotiate on? Right. And they may be related to your morals, they may be related to your ethics, they may be related to your decision making process, they may be related to how much money you're going to give out at the end of every month based on what you've made, whatever it is. Like, for us, it's a part of our culture, right? We know that we have to give 10% of all of our income at the blah 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 blah. We have them embedded in who we are. But I think that that helps you become self-aware, because I think what we're talking really about is conscious living. You see what I'm saying? We're not consciously, or a lot of us are not consciously making decisions. We're kind of in a rat race a bit, right? Okay, well, this will get me through tomorrow. Let me make that decision. And what you really need is, and I hope perhaps during COVID, people have taken that time to learn. Yeah,
Absolutely.
some time.
For sure. And I do like the way you really describe self awareness as conscious living, because really that's what it is. It's not letting life dictate how you live, or I guess everything around you dictating how you live, but being intentional about how you live your life based off of your values, what is important to you. And that could be anything. You have to decide those things. The second area of this skills, emotional intelligence, if you will, self-awareness. The other part is self-control. So on one end, you know yourself, you know your values. It doesn't mean that the world necessarily agree with all of that, and a lot of things are going to come at you that will seek to get a reaction from you, negative or positive. And especially for yourself in politics, that's like a classic political game.
Very
uh,
much.
and even in any career, when you're facing people, there's always going to be that element of people pissing you off, and things, emotions kind of just riling up. How do you approach the idea of self-control, and being able to keep those toxic emotions under control to achieve your long-term goals? What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? There's this book by Eckhart Tolle. What's the Power of Now? It's the Power of Now. So that book, because I have a personality that I actually do have or did have a lot of issues, regardless of how self-aware I was, with not reacting what would be perceived, and again there's the whole gender issue around this, but what was being perceived as aggressive, you know meanwhile I was just asserting me, I was asserting who I was. But obviously we're not going to get into the labels and all that stuff because it's a whole different story for a whole different day. However, what I did find was I really found that book very, very helpful. Yeah, so it's The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And it's an older book, and it's kind of revived itself in the past few years. And he really does talk about ego. So what happens when you are truly aware of yourself is you come to a point of being neutral. And I know it doesn't make sense. Like, you have to read a lot about it, right? But you come to a place where you're neutral, right? You actually are not reacting from a place of ego. You're actually just reacting from a place of facts. I'm telling you, it's hard. Like, let's not pretend that this is not a journey in itself, and you will probably fail 5 times out of 10, and that's okay, right? But at least let's try to get on that journey. I've tried. I'm not going to lie, it's quite difficult, because your ego will tell you, oh well, this person's offending me, or this person's doing this to me, or blah blah blah. So you just have to learn. Very different, very challenging. I really can't speak on it because I'm still in my journey.
Mm, for
Other than
sure.
that,
Yeah, I think what I hear from you, I think it's relating to another theme that has been on my mind over the last couple months, which is Stoicism, right?
mm,
And Stoicism is all about focusing on what you can control, focusing on what is under your immediate control. Because when life comes at you, or when people come at you, they bring all the emotional garbage, and you really can't control things coming at you. What you can control is your reaction, what you think, how you approach situations. And I think I like that idea of that you were describing there.
yeah. I mean, see, I have to, because I have a responsibility. I feel at times. Um, let's not pretend
Hmm.
for this moment in time that if you are a brown girl, black man, indigenous woman, or man, that if you react to things in a certain way, it will not spiral or have an effect that perhaps you did not want. So coming back to the world that we live in, right? All this stuff is interconnected. You know, I can tell you, if I'll use my brothers as an example. Um, my brother goes to superstore. I'm using this as an example, and pulls out his phone and trips over something, and somebody thinks he's attacking them or whatever, right? You think that scenario is going to go very well? No, it's not. So for us, that self-control at times can be life or death, right? It could be you're in jail, you've gotten arrested, your face is plastered over everything before they even have the evidence. So I think it's again, none of these things are cookie cutter. right? So you have to really know who you are, know what you're about, know what your own self-control, how it's going to affect your own life and your family's life.
For sure. And at the same time, also, we can't be too overly cautious. At the same time, we have to be unapologetic to being ourselves. You can't live life on walking on eggshells all day. You have to sometimes still just be true to yourself, and you can't control how other people feel. You can only control what you are doing and how you're approaching the world too.
Right. And I think that the key there is just, cautiously optimistic,
Mm,
right?
mm,
You're cautious. But again, you talked about soft skills. Okay. So like, is that not a soft skill to be able to read the room?
It
It
is
is,
indeed. It is.
right? So it is. It's a soft skill to be able to go into a scenario, and recognize by body language, by the way somebody is looking at you, by the words they're maybe using, whether or not you want to remain in this space, or you want to remove yourself from that space and again be cautious. There's nothing
Absolutely.
wrong with removing yourself. So for me, if I was my bros, I'd be like, hey, just get yourself out of that situation. It's not, you can't in that moment change somebody's perception of you.
No, no. Fantastic conversation, Rena. Last question I have for you. We had 51 minutes. It's gone by so quickly. But we're in 2021. What are your hopes? What are your aspirations for this new year? What's on your mind as we approach 2021? Well, we're in
Yeah,
2021.
I'm really just gonna continue doing what I'm doing. I'm doing a 6 series on intersectional feminism prior to doing a panel, like a national panel, on the issue post COVID. On February 2nd. So, if anyone wants to follow along, just follow me on Instagram and you'll see it'll be live on there.
Mm,
So I'll be doing that. A lot of really great discussion around that. Practice, I'm going to probably scale down a little bit so I can do other things. Yeah, wish to travel. I just want to go back to my beaches and, sit there and, ponder the world. Last year definitely was very difficult for a lot of people, but, I hope people found who they were, reconnected with who they were, took the time to learn about why something like this would have happened. The universe always has a way of telling you things, and perhaps this was, our lesson to just, let's step back, and without water, land, air, we really don't have much. So perhaps our goal for 2021 and the next decade is, climate. Let's fix our world, and let's fix our children, and let's fix the people around us, and let's minimize hate. You know.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for coming on the show. I've enjoyed listening to your insights and just getting a little peek behind the phenomenon of Rena Bokhari. So thanks for coming on the show.
You're so welcome. I had a great time. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thanks.